Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to score 760 on the GMAT. My name is Rajat Tadana. I'm one of the co-founders of e-GMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today, helping me make this webinar successful or useful to all of you is Komal Shah. Komal is a GMAT strategy expert. She's an ex-Be the GMAT moderator, and she's going to be our co-host today. In this webinar, we're going to look at three things. The first is, how do you get to that high GMAT score? How do you get to that 760, 730, 720 score, or 700? And I'm going to look at how do you build a personalized study plan to get there. The next thing that we're going to look at is once you have a study plan, how should you go about preparing so that you improve to the level so that you can get to that point. And then the third thing that we're going to look at are certain metrics that that we should track during this journey to make sure that we are on that right path. This is a free webinar. It's fairly heavily attended, and to make sure that that we do justice to this webinar, we ask a few leading questions. One of them is, when do you plan to take the GMAT? So if you've not responded to that one, please do so. The next one is, what's your target GMAT score? While you're responding to the second question, let me just review the results of the first one. When do you plan to take the GMAT? What I really see over here is that the biggest group is in about a month and a half to 2.5 months. It's about 43% of you. We have a good chunk of you haven't taken a date as of yet. It's about 28%. And then we have very few folks who have the test in the next 15 days, about 10% of you in the 16 to 30 day time period, and then another 16% in the month to 45 day time period. Now, with regards to the target GMAT score, so the biggest group again are two large groups, are 730 to 750 and 760 and higher. That's really good. Well, I'd say that's ambitious. That's really good. I always like that. But we also have a significant number of folks in the 660 to 700 and 710, 720 group over here. Now, regardless of the group that you belong to, whether you're in the 600 to 650, 660 to 700, or one of the other groups, what you're going to find is that the principle and the tools that we talk about in this webinar would apply to you. Earlier, and in fact, in some ways, we call this webinar how to go score 760 on the GMAT, and folks who weren't aiming for a 760 score felt offended. I just want to make sure there's no offense to you guys. It's just that a lot of folks who would join these webinars are aiming for those scores, but we are there to help you, those of you who are in that 710, 720 or 660, 700 bracket as well. The same principles apply, so take good notes. With that, thank you very much for this. I think let's get one more data point before we move forward. What's your current GMAT score? So, and we asked this question based on either the actual test or if you've taken a mock test in the last 15 or 20 days or so. So, and this is always, a very fun thing. There are lots and lots of options, so read the options over here before you put in the answers. Okay, and this is where it gets very nice. So, about 31% of you don't know your current score. And Komal, if you could give them the link to Sigma X Mock for those of you who don't know their current score, because one thing that I always ask people to do is to get a good baseline, and not just a baseline of what your score is overall, but what your strengths and weaknesses are in relative subsections. So when you take a Sigma X Mock, you actually get about 7 different scores, and I think those are very useful in helping build your study plan. Okay, but overall from the data over here, we have the biggest deterministic segment. That's about 560 to 600, about 18% of you. The smallest deterministic segment, and I'm going to ignore the 710, 720 bracket, is about 10%. So not a huge swing. I mean, 1.8x swing is not a huge swing that I consider, but we have ample people in each group. So that's going to be a fun webinar. We have some upcoming free webinars. We have a quant workshop that's tomorrow. Think of it as a proctored mock test. If you don't know where you currently stand in quant, if you want to understand what your strengths and weaknesses are, if you want to get that improvement plan, definitely register for this one. This one's tomorrow, 24 hours from now. And then next Saturday, we have a free webinar, probably our most popular webinar. It's a webinar on how to ace GMAT sentence correction by leveraging meaning and logic. The second one's hosted by Payal Tandon, who actually invented the meaning-based approach for GMAT sentence correction about 10 years back, and that's the approach that many experts follow today. She's the one who's actually imagined this approach about 3 times since that original invention. So this one definitely attend this, even if you are at that 80th, 90th percentile in GMAT SC. It'll help you get to that next level. If you're at that 50th percentile, definitely will set that foundation to get to that 90th percentile. Okay, we're going to do a couple of questions in this webinar in the second half, more specifically, and then to make sure that you're well, you have that foundation to do that. We send a few video lessons your way. The one that's more specific for this webinar is the verb ED modifiers. But other than that, I mean, a lot of people face difficulties with GMAT reading comprehension. So, main point concepts tell you how to go about one of the most common question types in GMAT RC. Again, you can watch these concepts from our free trial. In addition to that, another 40 odd concepts that are a part of the e-GMAT free trial. So just log into your e-GMAT account and you can get to those. With that, let's go right into the crux of this webinar. And so this is what we call as the presentation pane. And the reason we call this the presentation pane is because essentially this is where we present. And for many of you, the pane would have changed, and you probably should be seeing the screen which says, how do you score 95th percentile or better on the GMAT? Select yes if you can see this. All right, pretty much everyone's seeing that. That's wonderful. Thank you. So early on, I asked that question, what's your target GMAT score? And what we found was about 80% of the class was aiming for that score of 730 or higher, which is great. For that other 20%, and I want to tell you why should you get to that 730 or higher score. And even those who are aiming for that score, I will tell you, studying for the GMAT can get lonely. Studying for the GMAT can get very difficult. I mean, you guys, pretty much most of you are working professionals, and to study for the test post, a hard long day gets very difficult. So I want to give you some motivation as to why should you score that 730 or better on the test. This session is going to be about 2 hours from this point on. So this is 8 or 9 a.m. my time in Phoenix, Arizona, 8:39 in India, 7:09 in Pacific time zone. So a couple of hours from this point on. So 3 reasons why you should get to that score of 730 or higher. One is if you're aiming for top business schools, specifically, more specifically in the US, they now require a score of 730 or higher. And I'm going to really show some data to back this up. The other piece is scholarships. I mean, talk about an instant ROI. More than 50% of the $350 million of scholarships go to students who actually get to those 730 or higher. And this is based on our estimate. e-GMAT has got about $30 odd million worth of scholarships every year, and we get a significant amount of stats. And then the third piece, which is there, is and which is kind of a very ignored piece, is the delta between earnings from a top business school and from what I call a tier 2 business school, that delta is the highest that it has ever been in the last 15 years, and we've been tracking these numbers, and so all the more reason to go to a top business school. So essentially, if you're aiming for that 700, get to that 730. If you're aiming for that 720, get to that 750, and that your ROI of these 30 points could be about $500,000 or so. So data pertaining to the first point, this is what we see is the trends of median scores at top B schools. And what you see is that the 2 things that you'd observe. First of all, there's no Harvard or Stanford there. Why? Because at Harvard or Stanford, those median scores in the year 2014 were already around that 730 mark. The second thing is that schools and more schools are now moving towards that 730 mark over here. In fact, if you look at the trend over the last 5 years or so, the median GMAT scores at 23 out of top 25 schools have gone up. For the 24th school, the median has remained the same, and the 25th school, the median has actually gone down. If you look at MIT Sloan, if you look at Columbia, 80% of the admitted class, regardless of whether they're Americans, regardless of their background, has a GMAT score of 700 or higher. Essentially, what schools are telling is, if you don't have a score of 700, don't bother applying. And this is despite the fact that, when you compare the number of test takers in the year 2014 with that in the year 2018, what you're going to find is that there's a 15% decline in the test taking population based on our estimates. Again, there's a quote from Mark Either, who's the managing director at Ports and Quants. He says, the bottom line is that only the best of best have any shot of getting into these schools. And this trend is not just limited to the top 25. In general, this has been, the moving averages have been moving higher. And what you see in this table over here is, the schools that have had the most gains, the biggest 5-year increases. And you see, yes, there's Northwestern and yes, there's Ross, but there's the other 4 with the biggest gains are not in the top 25. They're actually in 26 to 50. Okay. Now this is statistical data. Here's some anecdotal data that B schools are aiming for for higher scores. And again, there's lots and lots of anecdotal data on our YouTube channel if you want to see more. Here's an example of a guy whose name is Nishant, and he scored a 690. He was rejected by Tuck, Penn State, and a few other schools. But then once he got to a 740, he got a full fellowship from Ohio Fisher, and this was in round 3, by the way, that full fellowship from Ohio, and he also got an admit from Columbia. He's currently studying at Columbia. The other piece is, schools such as Tuck give you feedback, and Tuck and Smeal told him that they liked his candidacy, but his GMAT score wasn't up to mark. So schools specifically told him this feedback. There's another case of Pravi, who applied to many schools with a 680, didn't get a single interview invite. But the moment she updated her score to 740, she got 4 interview invites within hours, within 7 hours to be more specific. One I can agree could be a coincidence, 4 cannot. She got multiple admits, and she's currently studying at Kellogg. And there's another example of a guy who was rejected at a score of 680 by schools and at similar schools, and then the 720 he got 4 full fellowships, and he's currently studying at Georgia Tech. And these fellowships, by the way, these fellowships at 720 were in R3. So he got rejected in R2, but in R3 with the 720, multiple full fellowships. So people talk about not being able to secure an admit. Here's a guy who got full fellowships in R3. And again, GMAT score, when it comes to this, what it proves is it's way more important than it has ever been, just because schools are looking for a higher GMAT score. The second reason, and probably the most immediate reason, is scholarships. B schools today reward a record number of scholarships, and more than half of those scholarships go to students who score 730 or higher. And this is based on our estimates. So 350 million is what's reported as the total amount of merit base. And when I say merit base, it means that it's purely decided on merit, not on need, not on a certain ethnicity or a background. And but 55% of them, that money goes to 740 or higher GMAT scorers, but 80% of them goes to 710 or higher. So if you do the math over here, which means if you get to a 740 and if you apply properly, you're likely to get at least a $40,000 worth of scholarship. Okay. And based on my discussions with directors at business schools, there are 2 factors that decide on scholarships, that decide scholarships. One is your GMAT score. Second is how much they love you during that interview. Again, statistical data. Let's go to some anecdotal data. One of our former students who received admits from Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Kellogg, as well as INSEAD. She's currently studying at Harvard. She got a $90,000 scholarship. Again, you can see a GMAT score. Victor Makula, full fellowship from Ross and Keenan Flagler. with a 770 score. Again, Kong Bui, another 760 scorer. He just didn't get a full fellowship from Ohio Fisher. He actually got $1,700 a month to study at Ohio Fisher. So he was paid that amount for his expenses. And people talk about paying for that MBA. This is getting paid to do an MBA at a certain B school. He graduated last year and he's currently working in the US. Again, you can Google him up. Nishant, we talked about it. He got $125,000 fellowship at a 740. He didn't get that $1,700 a month, but again, 125 grand, really, really good number again. Pravi, we talked about 80 grand scholarship, and then Krishnakant, full fellowship from multiple B schools. And here's a case of someone who got admission, not just secured admission, but also got fellowships based on his GMAT score. So Ayush scored a 710, applied to Ross, applied to Columbia, couldn't get through any school. Both of these schools waitlisted him. And then he improved his score to 750. He not only got admits from both these schools, he also got scholarships from both these schools. And again, if you watch his interview, you'd really see the school specifically told him 710 is not going to cut it. And again, he didn't even have to apply again. All he had to do was put in his updated score and he got the admit. Again, here's another quote from John Fuller, who's the former admissions director at Ross. He says, someone with a 770 is more likely to get a financial reward. The third reason, and probably the reason why that most people don't consider, is the delta in 10-year earnings. This is something which, frankly, when I did my MBA about 12 years, 13 years back, even I didn't consider, and this is something that I believe it's really, really important to consider. I'm going to show over here are two schools, and these two schools have been chosen very carefully. So there's Babson, there's MIT. Both these schools are based in the greater Boston area. And the reason I chose Boston was because it's not New York or San Francisco where the cost of living is super high. It's not Phoenix, Arizona, where I live, where the cost of living is super low. It's a good industrial a technological town is what you'd call it today, with plenty of opportunities. And students who study at Babson and students who study at MIT, a good chunk of them work in the similar geographic area, similar cost of living. They have access to similar opportunities. So when you think about the median salaries, starting salaries at Babson versus MIT, the delta is close to 40 grand over here. Now this delta is the highest that it has ever been. I'm a Babson grad, very proud Babson grad. I had a full fellowship from Babson. And when I was studying at Babson, the median starting salary from Babson was still 90 grand, but the median starting from MIT was about 115,000. And you can really see the delta wasn't as high at that time. But now it has become a lot higher. When you consider the average bonus, it's actually even higher. The delta has gone up even more. So when you look at that first year compensation, the delta is almost 60 grand. But if you just take the difference in compensation to be 45 grand, you're talking about over a 10-year period, a $450,000 difference. So it's a huge amount of money, actually. And again, the kind of effort you put in, whether you're a Babson grad or an MIT grad, is very similar. In fact, I'd say if you're a Babson grad, you probably work harder. So again, 3 reasons why you should aim for that score today is getting to your top business schools, get scholarships, and make more money. And I think the reason why I want to leave you with this message is because you will face times when you come back home tired and you're going to say, man, I'm going to study for the GMAT tomorrow. Remind yourself why you need that 730, 740 score, and why. Only the top 5 or top 2 percentile of students get to these scores, because it requires that persistence. It requires you to battle that fatigue and continue to work harder. Okay, so now that we know these scores are important, let's kind of look at what does it take to ace the GMAT. And let's just kind of get this answer from you. When you think about acing the GMAT, whether it's getting to a 700 score or a 730 score, in one word, what does it take to ace the GMAT? What comes to you as the first and foremost thing. Let's open this. And yes, this session is being recorded. We will send the recording over. If you have to leave, you'll get the recording. So if you were to, in one word, tell me what comes to your mind when it comes to acing the GMAT. And again, put in your answers. And then I'm going to broadcast results in about another 10 seconds. I'm waiting for about 40 answers over here. So what's required to ace the GMAT? And I want to really see, I've got 9 answers, 10 answers, and you won't see that you put in your answers, but I'm getting those answers if you're typing enter in the pod on the right hand side. Please don't put your answers in the Q&A pod, which is below the presentation, because others won't be able to see that. But put it in the right hand pod. I've gotten 27 answers there. Perseverance. Okay, let's I'm not going to read the answers out so that we get 40 independent, 34 answers in there, 35, another 5, and then I broadcast the results. 39, 41. All right, here are the results so that others can see. Accuracy, pacing, dedication, consistency, focus, right strategy, correct plan, practice, perseverance. So I mean, lots and lots of good terms over here. Most of them, I would say, are really, really important. One term that I like to discourage as a primary thing. It's important, but discourage as a primary thing is that word practice, because trust me, just practicing will not get you. It's not the first thing that you should worry about when it comes to acing the GMAT. So what do we think as e-GMAT with regards to acing the GMAT is this one term, and you'll see if you talk to anyone at e-GMAT, is acing the GMAT is about building ability, and we have a very quantified definition of ability. It's not your very qualitative definition that people have, or what I call as a vague definition. We have a very specific definition of what we call as ability. Why? Because the GMAT has a very specific definition of what you call as ability. So acing the GMAT, the first thing that comes to my mind is ability. The second thing that comes to my mind is data-driven preparation with consistent feedback. And these are the two things that we're going to talk about in this webinar. So a lot of those other things that you focus on, hey, I'm going to focus on solving questions quickly. I'm going to focus on with section 2 attempt, how to manage my stamina and all of that. They're important. But when it comes to building ability or preparing in a fashion which is where you get feedback and which is data driven, those are way more important than any of these other things. And we're going to look at that. So we talked about acing the GMAT is about building ability. Let's kind of look at what ability is and why do we care about it. And I'm going to look at two terms. One is accuracy, a term that you guys look at very closely when you do any kind of practice, which is, hey, if I solve a 10-question quiz, how many of them did I answer correctly? That's accuracy. Or in other words, accuracy is the percentage of questions that you answered correctly. Okay. The word ability is in the same context when you take a 10-question quiz that answers this question compared to other test takers. How good are you? What percentile level do you lie in? That's kind of what it is, and we measure 8 abilities within the context of GMAT, GMAT preparation. Let's kind of look at why we say ability is the most important thing, and then to do that, everyone knows GMAT's a computer adaptive test, and I'm going to just talk about how a computer adaptive test works in principle. Now the GMAT uses this principle, but it adds a couple more layers of complexity, but the core principle still remains the same. What you see over here is, two axes. Y-axis, you have difficulty level of question. So the higher you go on the y-axis, the more difficult a question becomes. And then on the x-axis, you see question numbers over here. I'm going to compare GMAT attempts of 2 different students. You're going to focus on just the first 5 questions over here. And so case one or student one is going to be in blue, and case two is going to be that green reddish thing. Okay, so so case one or student one starts with a median difficulty question. The first question in most instances, and I say most instances, is a median difficulty question. You get that question and you get that right. Then the second question is of a slightly higher difficulty. You get that, and the student case one gets that right as well. Consequently, the third question is even higher, and as you can really see, as you go from question number 1 to 2 to 3, we're going higher on the y-axis, and he gets that wrong. As a result, the fourth question that this particular student gets is of a difficulty level between question 2 and question 3. How do you figure that out? If you draw two horizontal lines between question 2 and question 3, you're going to find that question 4 is between those two lines. Again, these are not parallel, but if you drew parallel lines, you kind of get that. He gets that right, gets the fifth question, and he makes a mistake over there. Case 2 or student 2, again, starts with a median difficulty level, gets the first question wrong, consequently gets the second question, which is slightly easier, gets that right. Third question, again, a bit more difficult, gets that wrong. Fourth question, easier, gets that right, and gets the fifth question right as well. Two things to really see over here. One is, you can see how the test adapts to your ability level. And the second thing which is there is, you can really see that, let me actually ask this question. If I were to close the test, end the test at question number 2, question number 5, I'm sorry, if I were to end the test at this point over here, who do you think would get a higher score? Would it be student 1 or 2? All right, it's very clear. The answer is student 1. 95% of you are saying that. Okay, that's good. I'm glad you guys recognize this. Now, both these students have identical accuracy over here. They both have 60% accuracy over here, 3 out of 5 correct. Why is it that then student 1's doing much better? Why is student 1 doing a lot better than student 2? What's the reason? Simple reason, as many of you have correctly identified, is that he answered more difficult questions correctly. That's absolutely correct. And I'm glad that most of you are not saying that he got the first few questions right, but rather you've gone to the real cause that he's answering more difficult questions correctly. That is absolutely correct. And just to really see the stats, student 1 got 5 questions. Each of these questions were either at the average difficulty level or above the average difficulty level. Student 2 only got 1 question, which is the first question over here, at average difficulty level. Every other question was below the average difficulty level. Okay, so when it comes to acing the GMAT, two things are important. One is to make sure that the test serves difficult questions to you. The second thing is to make sure that you answer those questions correctly. And again, why do we say that? Why? Because GMAT is a test of ability, and when it comes to ability, how do you measure ability? The ability is simply a propensity to answer more difficult questions correctly. That's in very simplistic terms. I'm going to look at a quantitative definition of ability as well very soon. Now, this was just a very simplistic stuff, okay, just how a computer adaptive test works. On the next slide, I'm going to show you some data on this particular slide. I'm going to show you some data from about 2.5 years ago when the verbal section on the GMAT was 41 questions, and the GMAT prep test, which they weren't called official GMAT marks, but they were called the GMAT prep test. They gave us a ton of data, and you could extract this piece of data over there. And this is, you see, two attempts of two different students on GMAT prep. The red rectangles are question numbers where these students made mistakes. So if you were to look at these attempts a bit more closely, what you'd notice is that between question numbers 11 and 41, both of them, or both these students have made a similar, identical number of mistakes, actually, not just similar. So 9 out of 31 questions they've answered incorrectly. Um, and for the only difference between these two students is that student 2 has has made mistakes in the first two questions, but other than that, there's very little to choose between these two students. Okay. Now you would think if you purely looked at accuracy, um, that these students would actually get scores which are very similar, but the reality is very different. Student 2 got a verbal score of 32. Student 1 got a verbal score of 43. A verbal score of 43 is 97th percentile on GMAT verbal. When considering there are about 200,000 test takers take the test now, but he's amongst the top 6,000 students who take the GMAT. A verbal score of 32 is 65th percentile, which means that student 2 is among the top 70,000 students. Now, when you look at this data, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? If you want to type this down. Okay, that's an observation. First questions are key, all right. Okay, if you think a bit more deeply, don't answer two questions wrong in a row, but I mean, there are many instances. I mean, this guy got two questions wrong over here in a row. All right. Always get the easier one correct. Okay. All right. So that's good. So that's good data. And I'm going to end the poll so that you guys can see this. How many of you, and I'm going to put in a yes no poll, how many of you are thinking after looking at this, and I'm going to put in a yes no poll over here, that how many of you are thinking that, hey man, GMAT's a really harsh test? As the yes no poll. How many of you are thinking GMAT's a really harsh test? All right, let's get a few more responses. Let's get to about 90 responses here. The question is, how many of you are thinking that the GMAT's a really harsh test? 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. I got 90 responses, exactly 90 responses. Broadcast the results. 66% of you are thinking that GMAT's a really harsh test. 34% of you are thinking that it isn't. And the 34% who answered no, I think you have a much higher chance of scoring that 740 score than the 66% who answered yes. Here's something which is very interesting. When I ask this question, how many of you think GMAT's a really harsh test? Typically a majority says yes, but those people who say yes, they fail to consider that, hey man, I can score 97th percentile despite answering almost a quarter of the questions incorrectly. Where does that happen? I mean, they don't really say, hey, I can make 9 mistakes out of 41, still get 97th percentile. They really say, man, I make 2 more mistakes and I get to 65th percentile. And if you're thinking in that manner, you're still thinking in terms of accuracy. And yes, in terms of accuracy, these two students look very awfully similar. The second thing which is there is, if you're really saying first questions are really important. Yes, on many cases, if you make mistakes in the first questions, you'd find that it's difficult to get back. But I will tell you that's not a fact. It's just that if you make the first questions are a medium difficulty level, and yes, if you make a mistake on a medium difficulty or an easy question, the test thinks that you're not super smart. Okay, now this is you guys looking at this data through the lens of accuracy. That's not how the GMAT looks at this data. How the GMAT looks at this data is what we call as the lens of ability. And what you see is the same two students, and their ability scores in SC, CR, and RC. And when you look at these two students through the lens of ability, do they look very different? Do they look super different when you look at them? And that's how the test looks at them. I mean, it says student 1 has 95th percentile in SC, whereas just 85th percentile, 81st percentile in SC. In RC, student 1 is 87th percentile, whereas student 2 is 59th percentile. And yes, so essentially, when you're taking the test, the GMAT's actually calculating these ability scores constantly, and it's honing upon them. And that's what it cares about. So when we say GMAT a test of ability, this is what we really say. And so then the question is, what abilities does the GMAT measure? And everyone worries about the score of 800. And frankly, for me, yes, the score is the most important outcome, but that's not what I prepare for. What I prepare for are these other scores, the quant and verbal scores. And then from there on, I prepare for the arithmetic and algebra scores, as well as in sentence correction, the SC, CR, and RC scores. So on the GMAT, you actually have to measure these 5 abilities, 2 in quant and 3 in verbal. These 5 abilities automatically lead to a quant or a verbal ability, and then they automatically lead to that score out of 800. So what's important are these abilities. In fact, on the quant side, we measure 5 abilities that we use to create your arithmetic and algebra ability scores. So how does scoring on the GMAT work? Based on our research, we've really concluded that the official test has 5 independent engines, which means that these abilities are calculated independently, which means that how you do an SC has very little impact on the difficulty level of questions you get in CR. Similarly, how you do an arithmetic has very little impact on the difficulty level of questions that you get in algebra geometry. And when you combine the performance of these 5 abilities, you get those quant and verbal scores and the actual GMAT score. In fact, based on data from 1,000 DSRs, we've run a regression engine against those 5 ability scores, and we found an R-square, for those of you who understand what regression is, we found an R-square of close to 99%, which means these ability scores are extremely predictive of that end score out of 800. So when you're thinking about acing the GMAT, the first question and the first answer that you need to get is what ability scores are you aiming for in these subsections? Because that's what you're studying for. Just from a yes-no standpoint, prior to joining this, how many of you had a specific idea about what precise ability scores in each of these 5 subsections? How many of you were aware of, okay, you have to aim for these 5 ability scores? And again, if you're an e-GMAT student, yes, you'd be aware, but if you're not an e-GMAT student, how many of you were really aware of this piece? 3, 2, and 1. We end the ball, broadcast the results. About 60% of you weren't aware of it. I bet a good chunk of that 42% who were aware are e-GMATers, because we train you on this. So when you think about acing the GMAT, always tell yourself it's about building ability. Okay. Here's another data point over here. Here's a guy who improved from 520, a verbal score of 17 and a quant score of 44, to 710, and you can see verbal 17, which is like 15th percentile on verbal, to a 91st percentile on verbal. The reason why I have a success story is, one is it's very motivating. You improve close to 200 points over here, but then also the fact that this guy in his debrief has shared his ESR, so you can download it and you can look at this over here. Again, a verbal score of 40 is composed of these 3 abilities over here. You can see the SC, CR, and RC abilities. But other piece which is there is, and I'm going to share this PDF with you, that this guy, while getting there, made a ton of mistakes. This is how his accuracy diagram looked like. And the nice thing about this is he followed what we call as a build, maintain, maintain. First two blocks, he actually built his ability. He did not make a ton of mistakes, but he started making mistakes as the questions became more and more difficult in block 3 and block 4. In fact, in block 3 and block 4, he answered almost half the questions incorrectly. But because he made mistakes on really difficult questions, his score did not suffer as much. And you can really see that as you download his ESR. Again, going to that point that acing the GMAT is about building ability. Okay, someone was asking this question, which is that, hey, how long does it take to complete your courses? And I think Komal answered that particular person. And this is a very common question that we get, probably the most common question that we get post this webinar. And our answer to this question is it depends on what your starting abilities are. Why? Because you don't ace the GMAT by completing a course. You ace the GMAT by building ability. So let's kind of look at how do you build a personalized study plan, and then how does it have an impact on where you spend your time studying? So the first question, and I think before I go into answer these questions, what does a study plan do? When you think about a study plan, and you kind of really have this answer question, what does a study plan do? Let's get about 40 responses. The question is, what does a study plan do? Okay, let's get a few more responses. Helps build your ability, target efforts and focus, strategize and improve your ability. Okay, gives you small goals, improves. Okay, really good answers. Okay, that's really good. Now, another yes no question. How many of you have or are following a study plan? This is a yes no question. I'm going to reopen the poll. How many of you either have a study plan or are following a study plan? Let's get at least 90 responses. I have 70 responses so far. Let's get another 20. The question is, how many of you either have a study plan or are following a study plan? 80 responses. Let's get 10 more. 81, 82. How many of you currently have a study plan or are following a study plan? 86. Can we get 4 more? 88, 89, 90. Great. So 70% of you don't have a study plan, and but 30% of you have a study plan or are following a study plan. Okay. Where did you get that study plan from? Let's kind of get those for the 30% who said yes. Let's give about 10 responses. Where did you get that study plan from? Okay. Oh, everyone's e-GMAT. Okay. Built it myself. All right. Okay, one person says Jamboree. Okay, but other than that, everyone's e-GMAT. Okay, that one person who said Jamboree, I want to kind of ask you later on, but 15 minutes, how personalized that study plan. So not now, but 15 minutes. But you guys get really good answers to what does a study plan do. It does 3 things. One is it answers the question, how will I reach my target score, which means what ability scores will help me get to my target score. The second thing that it tells, which is really important. The first part, important. But as you go from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, things become more important. Why? Because if you don't do 2, it becomes a big failure mode. If you don't do 3, it actually becomes a bigger failure mode. The 2 is how much time do I need to put in to reach my target GMAT score? And this is distributed by various subsections. And that's really important. So how much time do I need to study SC? How much time do I need to study number properties? How much time do I need to study geometry, reading comprehension, and so on and so forth? And having good estimates for each of these in a personalized fashion is absolutely critical. Why? Because bad estimates lead to bad effort. Bad effort leads to uh, either you're rushing through the content or you're not improving things. The third piece is, where do you need? So even when you know you have to put in 30 hours in sentence correction, which aspects of sentence correction do I need to put in that time in? How do I need to put that time in? And that's number three, which is really, really important. And and, and, and and these three questions, getting precise answers to these three questions is what leads to a winning plan. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two students, Abby and Chase. Both of them are aiming for a score of 740. Both of them are at 600, and they're very different students. They have identical starting points, identical target scores. And what I'm going to demonstrate is, even though these guys have identical starting points and identical ending score, their study plans look very different. Where they focus their energy on, how much energy they focus. At a very high level, it may seem very similar, but when you look into the details, it's very different. So Abby is someone who's actually better in verbal than in quant. She's starting at a Q42 V31. Chase is starting is someone who's a lot stronger in quant and not as strong in verbal. And just to really kind of map you guys to Abby and Chase, let's kind of get you guys to really say, what is your strength? And I'm going to put in a poll question, and it's like, what's your strength? It's either quant or verbal or neither. So that way we're going to figure out who all maps to Abby, who all maps to Chase, who all maps to someone who's neither Abby or Chase. And again, if you're in that neither group, we have a study plan. We have many study plans for you as well. I mean, e-GMAT in the year 2019 created 15,000 personalized study plans. So lots of chasers, about 62% of you are chasers, about 13% of you are Abbies, and then about 24% are in that neither group. If you're in that neither group, you're kind of more like Abby than Chase, is what I would say, given the starting scores over here. So Chase is at Q49 V23 when in that score of 600. Abby Q42 V31. Now, just these quant and verbal scores are not important. You also need to know what are these scores composed of. So for Abby, and again, for simplicity, I've used uniform numbers, but these could be very different numbers. So Abby is at a 42nd percentile in algebra and geometry. Chase is at a 72nd percentile in arithmetic and algebra geometry. And on the verbal side, Abby is at approximately the 60th percentile, and Chase is on the verbal side is approximately at the 34th percentile, 35th percentile or so. In reality, these numbers on the verbal and quant sides could be completely different, but I wanted you guys to keep in mind just about four numbers. So on the quant side, Abby is at 40th percentile. On the verbal side, she's about 60th percentile. Chase, on the other hand, is at about 70th percentile in quant and about 34th percentile in verbal. Okay. So, first question. Do you think Abby and Chase will need to achieve the same quant and verbal scores to achieve 740, put in the same amount of time in quant and verbal, and need to study the same content in quant and verbal? Is there anyone who thinks the answer to this is yes? No, the answer is no. To each one of them, the answer is no. The question is, what is the correct answer then? And that's what we're going to figure out. Okay. So if you're an e-GMAT, how do you figure this thing out? What you do is you use our AI-driven tool called GMAT Planner. It tells you your study plan. It tells you where you need to spend your time and energy. But if you're an e-GMAT, go to your dashboard, click on the menu, and start GMAT Planner. If you're not an e-GMAT, you can write to me and get a mentorship time slot, and we can help create your study plan. Okay. So how does GMAT Planner work? It takes in your starting scores. You can really see over here for Abby. And there's a lot of information here. Here's a current score. Here are the current abilities in quant and verbal. Here's a target score. And GMAT Planner has figured out Abby's target quant and target verbal score, and the corresponding abilities that she should aim for. Okay, so where does Abby spend her time? And I'm going to just zoom this in a bit more so that you guys, so it's a bit more legible. This is the exact screenshot that you get out of the GMAT planner. This is an AI driven tool. For Abby, she's starting an SC at 59th percentile. She wants to get to 94th percentile. She needs to spend about 2.1 weeks studying SC. It's about 2 weeks more or less in every subsection in verbal, and about 1.1 weeks or about 1.5 weeks in each subsection in quant. Again, remember, Abby is not aiming for that 90th percentile in quant. She's only aiming for that 65th percentile. And both of them are real cases. So these are folks from last year. She can start preparing on 5th October. She can take the exam by about 11th of December or so. And again, this is all calculated based on the number of hours you can put in. So if you're Abby and you say, I can put in about 25 hours a week, this is what this is done. But if you say, I can put in 40 hours a week, these numbers would come in and the tool will automatically compress those numbers. If you say, I can put in 15 hours a week, those timelines will automatically expand. The tool does all of that for you. Okay, now let's do the same thing for Chase. Again, starting score of 600. Target score of 740, Q49 in the beginning, V23. You can see the percentiles over here. The tool says you should get to Q50 and it doesn't recommend Q51 just because Q50 and Q51 in our opinion are very close numbers, and a V40, and you can really see the target abilities over there. But when you look at the amount of time that Chase needs to spend on quant and verbal, Chase is going to spend about 9 weeks on verbal, about 3 weeks per subsection, more or less, and about a week per subsection in quant. Okay, so very different timelines overall. So when you look at Chase and Abby, okay, they're aiming for different quant and verbal scores, and they may look very similar, but they're truly different. A Q48 is very different from a Q50. A V42 is different from a V40. But the biggest piece over here is that Chase is spending about 1.5x as much time as Abby is spending on verbal. And similarly, Abby is spending twice as much time as Chase is on improving quant. Now, by the way, Abby is not improving quant to the same level. Chase is not improving verbal to the same level. Now, and this is where the kicker is. For those of you who actually prepared for the GMAT, if you actually need 9 weeks preparing for something and you are asked to do that in 6 weeks, what happens? If you are Chase and you're asked to prepare verbal, get verbal done in 6 weeks, what do you think will happen? What do you think will happen? It'll get lower ability. How would you approach this? You lose focus. You're going to rush through things. You're going to take shortcuts. You might skip certain portions of the course, right? And when it comes to rushing through things, you're not going to build ability. And that's where getting those precise estimates is really important. And that's where data is very important. When you've gone through 50,000 students, you get a lot of data. You know what it takes to succeed. But again, that's not the biggest difference. Remember, I said a study plan does 3 things. It tells you how you're going to ace a GMAT, how much time are you going to spend in each subsection. And by the way, the third thing was where do you spend your time and money. And to do this, we have this chart, which is, as you build your ability, what actions do you do? So if you want to get to the 25th percentile ability, big chunk of where you need to spend your time is learning concepts. If you want to get to that 50th percentile ability, you've got to focus on learning application. To go from that 50th to 70th percentile ability, again, remember, this is percentile, which means relative terms. You've got to master application. And then when you want to go from that 70th to 90th percentile, it's refining to perfection. Now, I want you to keep this chart. This is probably one of the most important charts that you need to remember. Maybe take a printout and put it over here. What this chart shows is that to achieve different ability levels, you need to learn or focus on different kinds of content. You need to have different kinds of metrics. And this is something that we've observed people do, and this is where when you do these things, you get to success or higher ability scores in the shortest possible time. Okay, so let's just map this to how Abby spends her time. Now remember, Abby is starting at a 59th percentile in SC. Where do you think in sentence correction Abby would spend her time in each of these stages? And for the ease, which stages do you think Abby would spend the biggest chunk of her time? Yes, master application and refine to perfection. Okay, that's where she's going to spend the biggest chunk of time. Why is she going to spend time learning concepts? Not a whole lot. Why? Because she already knows the concepts, and that's going to be the same thing in all subsections in verbal. And so the 2 weeks is going to be spent on mastering application and refine to perfection. Now, if you're an e-GMAT, okay, where would you spend time mastering application? What would you do? If you're an e-GMAT, application files, and where do you do refine to perfection? Scholaranium, yes. Application file, practice files, which correspond to the application files, and refine to perfection. You're not going to focus a whole lot on concept files, right? Now, if you're an e-GMAT, how would you figure out that you are at that 59 percentile ability? Their starting ability. You take the Sigma X text, or you'll take an ability quiz. Okay. Again, for e-GMAT, how many of you know of cementing quizzes? Just say yes or yay or nay if you know of the term cementing quiz, if you've written to us. Okay. For those of you who are saying yes, a few of you are saying yes, and then what you're going to see in the middle of next week is your Scholaranium dashboards will have a new quiz type called cementing quizzes. It's something that we've been working on. This is something that you create by yourself today, but going forward in 3 days, you'll have expert created cementing quizzes in every subsection. Okay. So this is something that we're working on, and this is going to be released in 3 days overall. Coming back to arithmetic and algebra, she's starting at a much lower percentile. And remember, she only needs to hit 62nd percentile. So she's going to spend a bulk of those 1.5 weeks in learning concepts and application and mastering application to a certain degree. She's not going to spend a whole lot of time in refining to perfection. She's not going to even bother looking at hard questions in Scholaranium. She doesn't need to get to a Q50. Building a good personalized study plan means that you need to define where you're going to spend your time, and you also need to define where would you not spend your time. Okay. Now, where would Chase spend his time? Where would Chase spend his time? Can you guys tell me? Remember, Chase is starting at 35th percentile. In SCCR and RC. He needs those extra weeks because he needs to spend time on learning concepts and mastering an application and mastering application. He's going to spend a bunch of his time over here. That's why the system gave him 3 weeks in each subsection. Okay, the darker the circle, the more time you spend over here. And on the quant side, he's not going to spend anything. He's already at that level. He's just going to focus on Scholaranium, medium and hard questions. That's all that he needs to do. Maybe 1 or 2 concept files based on the stats and Scholaranium. Okay, but no more than that. And the key takeaway over here is, even though both of them are aiming for that score of 740, both of them started at a 600, you can really see how their study plans are very distinct, how the milestones that they're aiming for are very distinct, and how the elements of learning that they are utilizing, they're very distinct as well. For those of you who are not e-GMATers, have you seen this level of personalization? First of all, does this make sense to you? Those of you who are saying no, can you tell me why you're saying no? I mean, there's good data that I showed to you. And again, this is frankly, if you think about doing projects, defining these areas, building capabilities, this is how you go about doing that in any field. It's not just the GMAT. Harsh, I see your question, but it's not complete. So if you could type the complete question, I'd be happy to answer that. Again, if you need help personalizing, you can write to me. Okay. So now we're going to really see, how do you build ability? How do you keep gauging ability? You take ability quizzes within the e-GMAT platform, you take cementing quizzes, and you get an ability score. You don't need to take the entire mock test. When you purchase e-GMAT, do you have a first exam that measures your ability? Absolutely. So if you go to Sigma X, you're going to really see how it measures ability and the kind of analytics that it provides to you. So here's an example of this. Can you explain why only medium and easy and medium level of questions are required for Abby in Scholarium? I think it was in quant over here, Harsh. That's a good question. Why? Because she's only aiming for that 68th percentile ability. She's not aiming for a Q50 or a Q51. That's why. Okay. So the next piece is how do you build ability? And in this, I'm going to really talk about two things. One is how and why data is important in helping you get to that 90th percentile. And then I'm going to demonstrate how, using the right methods, you get to that 90th percentile. Okay. Now remember, what we have learned so far. One is you need those high scores to get to top B schools. The second is, when it comes to the GMAT, it's a test of ability. And not accuracy. Measure your ability. Your GMAT scores is a foregone out conclusion if you achieve those abilities. When you build a personalized study plan, it tells you how you're going to get to that target GMAT score, where would you need to spend that time, and it tells you how to track those results. And I'm going to talk about that. And then there are these 4 stages of learning and 1 stage of retention. You learn concepts, you learn application, you master application, and then as you hit that 90th percentile, you refine to perfection. Then beyond that, you've got to maintain your performance, and we have specific quizzes for that as well. Okay, and again, remember the stages of learning. Learning concepts gets you to 25th percentile. Learning application gets you to that 50th percentile. Mastering application gets you to that 70th percentile. And as you refine to perfection, you get to that 90th percentile or so. What are certain takeaways? That you do different activities at different stages. And again, the intensity level at different stages is very different. I mean, if you're going to go from learn to mastering application, it's very, very intense. It's a very short period of time. You can do that in about 2 to 3 days if you're intense. But if you lose intensity, you can, in this part over here, okay, you can actually continue to do this for 15 days. You're going to find you won't get there. On the other hand, this one is what I call as discretely intense. When you're learning concepts, during those 30 minutes, you need to be intense, but between learning one concept to the other, you can take a 10-minute gap and come back and learn concepts. So again, intensity is different. Activities by themselves are different. So, but not everyone gets there, and people do get stuck at 60th percentile. For those of you who've been preparing for at least 90 hours, How many of you are stuck at that 60th percentile? Just a quick yay, nay, if you're stuck at that 60th percentile. Okay. Yes, for each section separately, quant and verbal. Yes. For any subsection where you're stuck. So I want to tell you, how does a 60th percentile student think, and how does a 90th percentile student think? Okay. So just to really tell you, how many people are there in each of these groups? No, when you're at 60th percentile, you're among the top 80,000 test takers on the GMAT. The 90th percentile, you're among those top 20,000. Most people who get to these scores, and especially the ones who are stuck, they spend just as much time learning as the 90th percentile guy does. So it's not about, once you get to that 60th percentile, it's not about the time. And then this is, we're looking at students who start, both of them who started from a 30th percentile. And people, with regards to their capability, they're very, very identical as well. It's not that one's much more smart than the other. But why is it that people remain stuck at that 60th percentile? It's because 90th percentile takes a different mindset. It's about achieving perfection. And just to really tell you, what does it mean by achieving perfection? When you think about just the sentence correction part of it, and Payal's going to demonstrate that, the 60th percentile guy looks at sentence correction and really says, hey, GMAT SC is about learning 8 major error types, and you see the error types over here. A 90th percentile student looks at it very differently. A 60th percentile student uses meaning as a secondary thing, but splits as a primary way to solve questions. Overall, while studying sentence correction, gets about 10 odd times of feedback while learning, and 10 at a higher end. And those 40 hours that I talked about, that guy spends about 30% of the time learning the concepts, and then the other 70% of the time practicing the concepts. Okay. The 90th percentile student looks at GMAT sentence correction from a from a conceptual standpoint, looks at the same big groups, but constitutes them of 200 major error types, which are in these error groups. Now the groups are the same, but the error types are different. Now, what's the difference between considering 8 major error types and 200 major errors in these error types? When you consider them as 200 major errors, you look for feedback on those 200 major errors. You achieve that perfection. If you want to get to that 90th percentile, meaning is the primary tool. GMAT sentence correction is not a test of grammar. It's a test of logic. Meaning is not an error type. Contrary to what people will tell you, meaning is not an error type. It's the primary way to solve questions. Every question in GMAT sentence correction can be solved using meaning. In fact, we train some English teachers in the US, and we have to train them on meaning. Just because even in the US, when they teach you supposedly grammar, they don't focus on meaning. This particular student gets between 80 to 120 feedback points while learning. And not 7 to 10, 80 to 120. And when it comes to spending time between learning and practice, it's about 60% of the time spent learning. It's the same 40 hours, by the way, and 40% of the time practicing. What it really means is the 90th percentile student, just from a pure practice standpoint, practices a lot fewer questions. Okay, and if you're doing that, achieving that 90th percentile on the e-GMAT course, just to really tell you, when you look at the stages of learning and the kind of feedback, when you're learning concepts, you get 75% feedback, 75 times feedback. If you're learning application, you get 20 feedback 23 times over here. When you're mastering that application and refining to perfection, again 30 to 50 feedback points. And then when you take mock tests, again there are 5 mocks, so you get at least 5 feedback times. And each of these feedback takes into 5 assessment items. So each of these feedback points over here includes at least 5 assessment items. So we average those errors out. You get feedback that's statistically significant to you. And again, if it actually tests 200 odd concepts, how can you achieve perfection if you get feedback only 7 to 10 times? The other thing is, what does this tell you? I mean, what feedback, How do you know what to do next once you get that feedback? And then the third piece is, are you learning how to apply these concepts? Okay, with that, now going to ask Payal to step in, and she's going to demonstrate how do you achieve that mastery of application? What is that meaning-based approach? So Payal, over to you over here.
All right, thank you, Rajat, and welcome everyone to this webinar in which we'll talk about how is it that you should prepare for your GMAT in order to get to that 90th percentile score. So Rajat just talked about what is the difference between a 60th and a 90th percentile person when it comes to thinking about the concepts that are there which are tested on the test. Now I'm going to talk about once you understand the concepts that are tested on any of the subsections, how do you achieve that mastery? Because it's one thing to know the concepts, it's another thing to know how to apply those concepts. And believe me, you need to consider application as a very separate entity, contrary to what a number of other people do. They basically talk about concepts and then directly solving questions. Again, you have to learn how is it that you should apply those concepts in order to solve questions. Okay, so let's talk about that. Why is it that you need to achieve mastery? Because you have to what is it that you need to do in order to achieve the mastery of application? There are three main things that you need to do. The first thing is you need to learn the step-by-step method. And let me just get my pen here. You need to learn the step-by-step method which you can use consistently, and again, consistently is the key here, to solve each and every question in that particular subsection. Okay, I don't want you to have one method for easy questions, another method for difficult questions. No, you have to use that one method that you can use consistently to solve each and every question, because ultimately when you're solving questions, you wouldn't know which question is easy or which question is difficult, right? I mean, you're given a question, your job is to solve that question, and you need to know that one method that you can use to solve that question. Okay, the second thing that you need to do in order to achieve that mastery of application is you need those detailed solutions during the learning phase, so that you learn from each and every question. Okay, and your goal should be to take those learnings to the next set of questions that you solve. Okay, and that's very, very important. Okay, what students typically do is they just practice, right? They select those random questions. Again, they don't know whether they are practicing the right level of question, the right kind of questions, right? Because they just have those huge repository of questions and they just solve them left and right. But again, the thing that they miss out on is that what is the level of the question and what is the kind of the question. Are they really prepared to answer those kinds of questions and those levels of question at the phase of learning that they are at? Secondly, do they have the detailed solutions? Can they take learnings, the appropriate learnings? And that's also very important. Students don't know, typically, people who falter, they don't typically know what is the appropriate set of learnings to take from one question to another. For that, you need to have the detailed solution that are based on this particular method that you need to learn in order to solve questions. Okay. The third thing is, you need feedback. Rajat talked about feedback when it comes to learning concepts, when it comes to application. We're going to talk about this feedback in a bit more detail and show you how a particular 90th percentile student, how a student who gets the feedback the right way, who implements the feedback the right way, is able to get to that 90th percentile. So Rajat is going to jump in back over here at this part of the session to basically explain the significance of feedback. I'm going to focus on the method aspect and the detailed solution aspect. Okay. All right. So is the agenda pretty clear to all of you? My part of this session, the agenda for that. And let me just get a poll here. Just want to make sure that everyone is clear about what we're going to do in this part of the session before Rajat steps in. Okay. Let's just, let me get a pulse of this class right now and tell me what is the process that you use today to solve SC questions. First of all, how comfortable do you feel at least 80% confident in your SC ability? Press yes if you feel at least 80% confident in your SC ability. Okay, so less than half of the class, or less than half of the segment of students who are answering this question. All right. Now, what problems are you facing with sentence correction right now? And again, I'm going to be taking up SC question for demonstration purposes, but whatever I talk about from sentence correction standpoint is applicable across the board for each of the other subsections as well. So tell me, for SC specifically, what is the problem that you're facing? What is that one thing that keeps you away from getting comfortable with SC? Can't get the intended meaning of the author, rules of grammar, modifiers, okay, modifiers, clauses, connectors, modifiers, knowing idioms, okay. All right. Now, I'm going to ask another question here. Tell me, when you solve, okay, how many SC questions have you solved till date? Let me reopen this and approximately, you don't have to give me an exact number. How many SC questions have you solved till date? 40, 100, 50, 10, okay, 500 plus, oh my goodness. Dedicatedly 50 questions, okay, 200 perhaps, okay. For how, okay, now my next question is, and I'm going to try to frame it up as precisely as I can. Press yes if for at least 70% of the questions you got 100% of the meaning of the sentence before you looked at the answer choices. So what I'm saying is, for at least 70% of the questions that you solved, you understood 100% of the meaning before you looked at the answer choices. Okay, less than half of you. All right. Okay, so let's delve into the method, and that's where the problem is. In order for you to get to that 90th percentile in sentence correction, okay, you have to get 100% understanding of the meaning of the sentence before you start before you even delve into the answer choices. Okay, and that's the problem right there. And that you have to do for all questions, not just 70% of the questions. For all questions, you need to do that. Okay, and that is where we come to the method. Right now, based on the responses that you've told me, you don't have the optimum method to solve SC questions. Okay, so let's delve right into it. I'm going to give you a question. I'm not going to ask you what method you use. I'm going to give you whatever method you utilize. I'm going to give you about 90 seconds. Usually people do end up taking 2 minutes, and I'm okay with that. I'm not going to do a hard stop at 90 seconds. You just solve the question and then be true to yourself, and I ask you follow-on questions based on that one, okay? All right, so let me get the poll right here. Give me just 1 second. Okay, no, not this one. Yes, here you go. So here's the question, and I'm going to show you the question now. Go ahead and solve this one. All right, 90 seconds are up. I'm going to give you some more time. Another 30 seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll now. So you guys took a little bit more than 2 minutes, and that's okay. So here are your responses. Choice C has 34% of the votes, and this initially was the this is the most popular choice. Then 28% for choice D. Choice E is 22%, and then we come down to B 10% and A 6%. Okay. All right. How was this question? I'm going to take this away. How was this question? Difficult, easy, manageable, tough? Okay, what was difficult in this question? Did you have any problems with modifiers in this question? Or any problem with idioms? Because those were the things that you had mentioned earlier. I have problems with idioms, I have problems with modifiers, I have problems with clauses. So what was the problem with this question? Options were quite close. Okay, good. It was long. Yes, absolutely. Completely underlined sentence and pretty dense sentence. What else? Difficult is that the full text is put into the question. C or D, that's the confusion. Hard to choose between two choices. Okay. All right. I chose the option that sounded right. Okay. Now, one thing that I want all of you to keep in mind is whenever you answer a question and you get the feeling that the options are very close or that you have no idea how to choose between the final two options, I want that to be a very big signal, very big red flag that you are not following the method. Okay, I want you to make a note of that in your scratch pad right now so that you understand what is the clue that tells you that you're not utilizing the correct method. Okay, because if you feel that the options are close and if you feel that you're not able to select shortlist, you are not able to select one choice based on the final two options, that means there is something that's a symptom that you're not a symptom of the problem that you're not applying the method correctly. Okay, is this point well taken? And I'm going to prove my point, but I right now want you to understand that this is what I'm going to prove to you. Okay, so do you understand this point? The why part I'm going to explain, but just make note of this, that these two are clues that you're not applying the method correctly. Okay. Most students typically utilize splits method to solve questions. They find similarities and dissimilarities among the answer choices. How many of you utilize splits method? When I say splits, I mean do vertical scanning, do figure out what are the similar things amongst the choices, what are the dissimilar things among the choices. So again, a number of you do utilize that method, and it's not easy to utilize to figure out splits when a complete sentence is underlined, and that also I understand, right? Now in this question, certainly the entire sentence is underlined. Even if you try to figure out the similarities, you really don't have much of a basis to reject one kind of choice from another, right? So again, you cannot use splits method consistently to solve SC questions, because especially for the difficult questions. Now, for difficult questions, regardless of whether the entire sentence is underlined or not, it is very difficult to consistently use the splits method. Okay. which means you really need a different method to solve questions. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what is the method that we utilize. Okay. And this is a 700 level question. Okay. Now, the first thing that I do is whenever I solve any question is, you read the sentence and you understand the meaning of that sentence. And when I say meaning, it's not just getting a gist of the sentence, it is understanding each and every aspect of the sentence, because that level of understanding is absolutely required when you solve the question in the test environment. Okay. And I know a number of you would be thinking about it that, okay, GMAT is a timed exam. How do you expect us to spend so much time on the original choice? That is a valid question, but if you spend that time upfront on the original sentence, okay, you will be able to get a lot of basis to eliminate incorrect answer choices. Okay, so all you're doing is you have the same amount of time. All we are doing is we are redistributing the time. Today you spend only this much amount of time reading the sentence, and you spend all this amount of time doing back and forth among the choices. What I am telling you is that you spend this much amount of time in reading the choice so that you have a solid basis for rejecting the answer choices here. Okay, so we are simply redistributing the time. I know that my timeline actually is so we are just redistributing the time. Okay, all right. So with that being said, let me remove this part here. Give me 1 second. Okay. All right. So the first thing is you read the sentence by strategically pausing. And this is what I'm going to do. The church coined the date Feb 14th as Valentine's Day with an ulterior motive. So I'm just going to pause here and I'm just going to read understand what I've just read. The church coined the date Feb 14th as Valentine's Day. So the church has assigned or designated the date Feb 14th as Valentine's Day. With an ulterior motive to Christianize the pagan celebration of Lupercalia. So I pause here. Why am I pausing here? Because is claimed is a verb. So let me just pause before that to understand what is this ulterior motive. With an ulterior motive to Christianize the pagan celebration of Lupercalia. Now tell me, who has this ulterior motive? According to what we have read so far, who has that ulterior motive? The church has that ulterior motive. Okay, so you need to understand that okay, the church designated Feb 14th as Valentine's Day with that motive to Christianize this other celebration, some other religious celebration of Lupercalia. Okay, now read further. Is claimed by a few experts. Now this is where things get a little bit shaky. It doesn't seem right. I mean, is claimed by a few experts. It seems as if what is claimed by a few experts. Now, how many of you felt that there was a sudden jump in the sentence? When you were reading the sentence, how many of you felt that there was a sudden jump? Good. Now, if you are reading the sentence slowly, you will be able to recognize inconsistencies in the sentence structure, because you are now reading the sentence slowly with an intent to understand 100% of the meaning. Okay, that is when you will be able to identify these issues that exist in the sentence structure. And that's the beauty of reading the sentence slowly, because then you can identify these jumps. Okay, now definitely, and whenever you identify such jumps, you know that there is an issue here. So definitely there is some issue over here with this part of the sentence. But despite that, your goal should be to read the entire sentence to understand everything that the author wants to communicate. Think about this. Whenever you're reading a sentence, think about getting all the pieces of the puzzle together, understand the meaning of those. Try to fit in those pieces together to understand what this author is trying to communicate. You are author's friend here. Okay, author may or may not know how to use appropriate English to communicate his point, but you are his friend and you need to make sure that you understand what the author is trying to tell you, and then you communicate that appropriately. Does this make sense? I mean, this is the best analogy that I can provide to you, so that you understand the extent to which you need to understand the meaning of the sentence. Okay. All right. Now, is claimed by a few experts. Okay. So basically, what I understand from this is that this whole thing about the church coining this date as Valentine's Day with the ulterior motive to Christianize this pagan celebration, this fact is claimed by a few experts. Some experts say that. Okay, some experts say that church coined Feb 14th as Valentine's Day with this motive. Okay, now I read further. But it is celebrated on this date. Now, when I see the word but, what does that tell me? That tells me that there's going to be a different point of view now. Okay. Now, so let me read that. But it is celebrated on this date. Now, different point of view with regards to what? With regards to why Valentine's Day is celebrated on Feb 14th. So, really speaking, the author is telling me two things about why Feb 14th is celebrated as Valentine's Day. Okay. Why is that the case? The first one is the church's motive, and the second one is what I'm going to read next. Now, I haven't read the entire sentence, but as I'm reading whatever parts, I'm conceptualizing everything together. I'm trying to understand, I'm trying to fit the entire, I'm trying to see the entire puzzle. Okay, and that's what you need to be doing. Okay, but it is celebrated on this date to honor the anniversary of Valentine's death or burial is the more prevalent belief. Okay, so now what it is saying is that it's celebrated on this date to honor his Valentine's death, to honor the anniversary. That is the more prevalent belief. So there are two beliefs. One is the belief by few experts. Okay, and let me get rid of this stuff. Okay, so there are two claims being made. Okay, one is the two claims being made of what? Of Feb 14 being celebrated as Valentine's Day. Okay, the first claim is the fact that church designated it with a specific motive. Okay, the second claim is that it's really celebrated to honor the Valentine's death or burial. Okay, now claim 1 is made by a few experts, and claim 2 is the more prevalent belief. Okay. Now, let me ask you, tell me what all points were you able to extract when you solved the question on your own, and let me get a poll over here. Okay, let me get the, how many did you? Okay. Tell me which ones were you able to understand. If you were not able to understand any one, then select 0. Actually, it's not how many. I want you to tell me which ones. Let me change the poll here. All right, here you go. If you were not able to understand any, then select 0. Okay. So I see that what claim 1 and 2 were is something that a number of you were not able to understand. Okay, but quite a few of you were able to understand that there are that few experts have made a claim, and then there is a more prevalent belief. So that's something. So this part was, number 3 was easier for this class to understand, but point number 2 is where quite a few of you faltered. Okay, and again, that is where it's very important that you understand each and every aspect of the meaning. Okay, so for those of you who were able to understand all the aspects, then that means that you can understand the sentence well enough. But for those of you who were not able to understand all the aspects, you need to build your skill set. Okay, so that's my feedback number 1. Okay, and again, we teach this strategic pausing method in our master comprehension course. Okay, so now let me tell you, once we understand the meaning of the sentence, what we do next is we understand what all errors are there. Now, if you are reading the sentence slowly, as I told you earlier, you would be able to spot such errors in sentence structure errors, especially while you're reading the sentence, and that's what has happened over here. We know that is claimed is an issue and is an issue, because again, the highlighted verbs don't really have associated subjects. Okay, now we're going to take a look at each and every choice. Choice B was not selected by very many people. So again, we'll breeze through this one. I'll get directly to choice number C, which was selected by maximum number of you. Okay. While a few experts claim that church coined the date Feb 14th as Valentine's Day with an ulterior motive, their more prevalent belief is that it is celebrated on this date to honor. Now tell me one thing. You guys have understood the meaning of the sentence well. What is wrong with this sentence with regards to the meaning? Remember, claim 1 was by few experts. Claim 2 is the more prevalent belief. Look at this word here, their more prevalent belief. What does that mean? That means that the more prevalent belief of few experts is that it is celebrated, right? And that is wrong, because that changes the meaning of the sentence. Okay, it's not that there is not clear. There is clear. There refers to the few experts. But what it is saying now is claim 1 is by few experts. And by the way, claim 2 is also by few experts. And this is the more prevalent belief of those few experts. Do you see the change in the meaning? Because that is what I want you to take away from this, that such a subtle, I mean, you need to pay attention to each and every aspect of the sentence in order to answer SC questions correctly. Okay, because people focus so much on grammar, because people focus on meaning as one of the errors, okay, they lose sight of such shifts in the meaning. And difficult questions in SC are more than likely to have such shifts in meaning. Okay, and that's the reason why you need to have that 100% clarity of sentence, not just the gist, because if you don't have that 100% clarity, you are going to miss such details. Okay. Now you weren't able to spot the distortion because you didn't understand the meaning completely. That is why you were feeling that the choices are very similar. If you understand the meaning completely, you would not feel that the choices are similar. Let's take a look at choice D now. Okay, choice D. The church coined the date Feb 14th as Valentine's Day with the ulterior motive, as claimed by a few experts, but its celebration on this date is to honor the anniversary of Valentine's death or burial, the more prevalent belief. Now here, we don't know what was claimed by the few experts. Was it that the church coined, or was it that the intent? So what was claimed by a few experts is not very clear. Okay, that is why choice D is wrong. The other thing, the more prevalent belief, it's not connected appropriately with what is the more prevalent. It doesn't tell me what the more prevalent belief is. It just seems a little bit hanging out there. Okay, and that is why choice D is wrong. Okay. Do you guys see why choice D is wrong? Again, pretty subtle changes. I mean, you were confused between choices C and D, right? And both the choices are definitely wrong, and they are wrong based on the meaning. Okay, now choice, the more prevalent belief, you may argue, okay, this is a grammatical error. Yes, it's a grammatical error, but again, that grammatical error stems from the fact that it's not really telling me what the more prevalent belief is. The author wants to tell you that there are two beliefs. One, which is claimed by a few experts, the other which majority of the people believe. So those two things need to be expressed appropriately, and this choice doesn't do justice to that. Okay, so again, if you focus on the meaning, if you focus on that 100% clarity of the sentence, you will be able to not worry about the nuances of those rules, grammar rules, because you'll have your focus on a much bigger picture, and that is what the intent of sentence correction as a section is. GMAT, I mean, your MBA schools don't really care whether you are grammarians or not, right? All they care about is, can you understand a given piece of text? And based on that understanding, can you express yourself appropriately, right? That is what they are testing in sentence correction. Does that make sense? Yes or no? And again, it's very important to keep the whole intent of the section in your mind when you are approaching how to solve the questions, or when you are deciding what the right approach to that section is. Okay? All right, now let's take a look at choice E, which was the third popular choice, but I believe you guys, people who selected choice E, majority of you selected it because, again, you just thought, let me select it. That the church coined the date Feb 14th as Valentine's Day with an ulterior motive is claimed by a few experts, but the more prevalent belief is it is celebrated on this date to honor the anniversary. Now, this one expresses the intent of the author. Now, this choice was rejected by quite a few of you, but it was rejected on improper grounds, and I'm going to talk about that as well. Okay, but first, let's talk about the method here. Okay, you need to be able to solve such questions. In order for you to solve such questions correctly in a consistent manner, you need to master this method. Okay, do you guys understand that, or do you guys agree with that? Yes, and I'm going to get to why you rejected choice E, and that's going to be in my next section. My first section was my first motive was to teach you the method, to prove to you, not teach you the method, to prove to you that you need to have the right method, the meaning-based method, in order to solve questions, and you cannot just use meaning as a secondary error type. Okay, you can't just solve the question using your regular method and then say, oh, now I've exhausted all my errors, now let me take a look at the meaning. No, it doesn't work that way for difficult questions. And if you want to get to that 98th percentile ability, you need to have that consistent method to solve difficult questions correctly. Okay, now the second thing is, how do you effectively master the method? Okay, for that, as I said, you need to have detailed solutions, and that is where I'm going to talk about what kind of analysis should you be doing when you are reviewing the solution. Okay, and it's very important to do the strategic review appropriately. Okay, what is strategic review? When you are doing strategic review of a question that you have solved, whether you solved it correctly or incorrectly, you need to ask these questions to yourself. Did you understand all the aspects of the meaning presented by the original choice? Okay. Why did you reject the correct choice? Okay, because if you answered it incorrectly, then you must have rejected the correct choice. Was it because you misunderstood some grammatical rule, or was it because some other issue? Right now, why did you select an incorrect choice? Was it because of a meaning issue that you could not spot? Or was it because you misunderstood some grammar rules? Okay. Now again, these are the questions that you absolutely need to answer for each and every question that you solve. Okay. Especially, I mean, I would say even for the questions that you solve incorrectly, but even for the questions that you solve correctly, but definitely for the questions that you solve incorrectly. Okay. In fact, when you're learning, you should do this level of review for each and every question that you solve. Now, for this question, why did you reject the correct answer? There are two possible reasons, and one of them has been specified in the answer poll here. Unfamiliar sentence structure, that subject verb. This is an unfamiliar sentence structure. That followed by the subject, the church coined the date as Feb 14th, is claimed by, this is the verb, right? This is the subject and this is the verb. So this just seems to be a little bit of an unfamiliar sentence structure, and some of you would have thought that, okay, this doesn't seem right. Okay, and again, seem right is a very seem right, or this doesn't sound right. You shouldn't have these expressions while solving sentence correction questions. Okay, don't go by that. Go by hard facts there. Okay, the other reason why some of you may have rejected this question is, let me get rid of this stuff here. You saw this, but the more prevalent belief is it is celebrated, and you felt as if that was missing. Okay, and that is a misconception. Right, and yeah, so one of you has written, belief is it celebrated seem ungrammatical again, but the more prevalent belief is it is celebrated, right? So but the more prevalent belief is it is celebrated. This seems to be ungrammatical, but again, seems to be is not the same as is grammatical, is ungrammatical. Basically, this is a grammatical rule that you misunderstood. It's a misconception that you always have to use that even when it is used as a connector. And again, we have a full concept on that in which we explain this misconception to you. Okay, but again, and it's okay to have these misconceptions when you're learning, when you're in the learning phase, right? And that is why you need to have those detailed solutions that tell you why is it that you rejected, why is it that you could have rejected the incorrect answer, the correct answer choices. Okay, today, whatever source you utilize, how many of you see this level of solution wherein it not only tells you why incorrect choices are incorrect, but also why could you have rejected the correct choices? How many of you do that level of analysis? I mean, you don't have solutions that actually explain that to you. Okay, now let me take a look at each and every answer choice. Choice A, there's sentence structure issues. Choice B, again meaning distortion. Choice C also meaning distortion, because again there is an issue. Okay, and choice E is choice D is the correct one, right? Choice E is the correct one. Now again, let me show you the solutions for this question. This question is from our Scholarium platform. Now, this is the level of detail of the sentence structure, just understanding the meaning that we teach you. Okay, how many of you see today utilize solutions that have this level of detail of just how do you understand the meaning? Majority of you do not. Okay, and that is where the problem is. So you don't really know whether when you are reading the choice, whether you're reading the original choice, are you getting everything from the sentence or not? Okay, error analysis. Usually error analysis is a single line statement. Okay, now over here we teach you why is it that there are these structural errors that are leading to meaning-based errors. Okay, then for each and every answer choice, we teach you in detail. Okay, why is it that each answer choice is incorrect? Okay, you don't have this level of detail in each and every solution that you see today in utilizing any of the outside sources. You get such level of details only at e-GMAT, not only for questions that are in Scholarium, but each and every question that you interface in the platform has this level of detail of solutions. Why? Because you need this level of detail of solutions. Okay, and that's why we spend so much time in creating each and every solution for you, so that each question that you are attempting on the e-GMAT platform, you learn from each and every question, and you have that progressive learning as you move from one question to another. Okay, and again, these are the questions that you need to ask yourself and answer for each and every question that you solve. All right, so with this, I'm now going to invite Rajat back into the session so that he can carry on with the feedback aspect of it. All right. Because again, you need to learn the method, and then you need to know what the right method is, and I hope that you were able to get that. Secondly, you need to know, okay, you need to have those detailed solutions so that you can learn from each and every question that you're solving. And now, next, you need a system that gives you the feedback so that you know where are the gaps in your understanding. Okay, so let me see if yeah, so Rajat is there. Rajat, over to you now.
All right, guys, that was good. And now let's kind of talk about how can we go to the next step. First of all, Pal talked about application. Pal talked about the meaning-based approach, and you got a preview to what a meaning-based approach is in this. And first of all, do you guys see a consistency in approaching questions? I mean, there was no trick. You started with understanding the meaning, then defining the errors, and then really even on the error side, we didn't really look at a whole lot of grammar, and then we moved on to the answer choices. Do you see that consistency over here? Okay, now let's kind of see how do we get to that 90th percentile from the 70th percentile, and again, why do we need feedback? Because we want to improve. Learning the methods gets you to that 70th percentile. You want to go to that 90th percentile, and that's where feedback, that's where precision is very important. And so let's see how we get there. But before that, let's understand why should you learn these methods, or how do you learn these methods? You learn these methods using application files which are inserted in the e-GMAT course at strategic points. So you learn a few concepts, we teach you how to apply them. Then you learn the next set of concepts, we actually build on that application and put in more application files and then put in practice files along with that. And so essentially you're not learning 200 concepts all at once, but you learn groups of concepts and learn how to apply them. And what we've seen consistently across these 50,000 students, and in fact on our YouTube channel there's a small sub playlist which says data and methods power student success, where we see the stats, is that if people do this consistently and they achieve 80% or higher scores in our concept files and application and practice files, they hit that 70th percentile ability even before you reach Scholarinium. So when we say by the time you finish the course, it's even before you hit Scholarinium, and you can really see those examples over there. And what you see over here is how the application files start to become more and more prevalent as we increase the difficulty level of the course. So this is just in the SC course, but every aspect of the e-GMAT course is designed in this way. So starting with subject, verb, and verb, moving to pronouns, then modifiers. So you see the width of these modules shows the number of concepts over there. And then as you go higher on x-axis, the concepts start to become more logic-based and hence a bit more difficult. And when you think about most preparation courses, they'll teach you all the concepts and they'll teach you application after there. But within the e-GMAT course, what we do is we insert application and practice files along with these concepts. And similarly, for example, in subject verb, you see one application, one practice, and verbs, you see more. It's a bit bigger concept. Or a bit bigger set of concepts and hence more application. Modifiers, you see 3 application files and corresponding practice files along with this. Parallelism, you see 2. Comparison, you see 2. And then you have meaning and all of those things over there. And again, at each point in time, you get multiple feedback overall. And as you learn using the methods, you get feedback with regards to, are you doing all of these steps properly, and you get to know if you're struggling with the certain aspect of the method. So how does your score improve? When you get feedback at least 23 times while learning the SC method, in addition to getting feedback about 70 odd times while learning concepts, and then as you act on that feedback, your score definitely improves from there. And let's kind of look at how these scores uh, um look in student dashboards. And you see this little thing over here. Uh, in critical reasoning, we have 39 application files and practice files. So you get such feedback a lot more frequently than RSC course. So there's a student Sahil who scored a 730 with a Q49 V38. And we're going to look at his dashboard over here. So this is the subject verb module, the smallest module that you see. This is the paid course. And what you see in this case is, good scores around the concept files. Now, the other piece is this is the time that this guy spent watching this concept. This is not the length of the video. And we track this, we build technology to track all of this. And all of this technology is built from grounds up. We are the only prep company, not just the GMAT space, but GRE or SAT space that tracks all of this. Um, Here again, you see scores in concept and files and practice quizzes over here. He scored low in a file, he got feedback, and the nice thing about this is you can see that he spent 47 minutes reviewing this. As a result, he perfected in the question and practice quizzes over here. Again, you see verbs over here. You see verb sequencing, difficult concept. He spent a lot of time, and that's where you modulate your learning. And he did really, really well in the post-assessment quiz. So there's each of the concepts you get quizzes. Verbs application, again, he did really well. Yet he spent time reviewing solutions, doing that strategic review over here. Verbs practice quiz, again, he didn't do as well, but then he revised, and as a result, in the OG quiz, he did really well. The next piece essentially is how do you make sure when you make mistakes, you actually learn from them. You can really see this is a screenshot of our practice quiz. He made mistakes on hard questions. In the verbs part, he bookmarked them so that he could review them later on. Now, none of this is rocket science, but tracking that data is very important. Building those good habits, having those tools where you can bookmark these questions is really important, because essentially that's what separates a 70th percentile guy from a 90th percentile guy. Not making those mistakes. And again, he took the feedback very seriously and took corrective actions at the right time. And again, this is a quote from his debrief. He said my concepts were not bad in my first 2 attempts, but I lacked the knowledge of application of the same. And concepts can help you narrow it down from 5 to 2. I think many of you know this, but when it comes to the application, that's when the game actually changes. So again, what do you need to attain mastery of this application? You need to learn the right methods. You need detailed solutions, and you need tools to make sure that you know which solutions you need to focus on. And you need that feedback that you get every 30 minutes. Without that, you might be able to get to that 60th, 65th percentile, but getting to that 90th percentile starts to become very difficult. Again, what other tools do we have to help you get from that 70th to that 90th percentile? Let's look at those. I talked about cementing quizzes, and let's see how you did cementing methods in Scholaranium till date, and how do you do that. So Rohit reached 90th percentile in SC, and you can watch his debrief on YouTube. But essentially, let's kind of look at his stats over here. On an average, he scored 90th percentage in every application file, and in only 1 out of his 23 files, he scored less than 70%. Again, on our YouTube channel, you can see a screenshot of not screenshot, actually an entire video of how his dashboard looks like under our data and methods channel. And then this is his Scholaranium screenshot. Now, a few things over here that you see is that reasonably high accuracy in hard, which is I think very good, about 70th percentile or 70th percent or so accuracy in hard question. That's all that we ask for 90th percentile. Good accuracy in medium, excellent accuracy in easy. Another piece is you can see the time to answer questions as increases as the difficulty level increases. However, when you don't get something, you take a lot longer, which in general happens. The other piece which is there is he only solved 64 questions. Why? Because he had a great launch pad when he finished the course, which means he didn't have to solve hundreds and hundreds of questions to hit 90th percentile. In fact, that's a pattern that we see repeat again and again and again. If you do well in the course, you don't need to solve hundreds and hundreds of questions. That is the power of data. That's the kind of perfection that it leads to. So again, different kinds of learning at different stages is really, really important. And it leads to you achieving that 90th percentile a lot more quickly. If you don't know the concepts, the way you focus on learning concepts is different than the way you focus on learning application, which is again different from the way that you focus on mastering that application and achieving perfection. Okay. And so the thing which is there is, it's not just the video lessons that we offer. You can practically get video lessons elsewhere. It's the insights that you get based on the technology that extracts data from these video lessons and the tools that then help you act upon those insights. It's about that personalized feedback that helps you get to that 90th percentile. That is really important. And that's the reason why, despite the fact that we are a 40-person company and each one of us works full time, at e-GMAT, we still focus just on the GMAT. Why? Because building that technology, building those tools, building that feedback mechanism requires all of that R&D. So with that, I've come to the end of this webinar. Again, to summarize, aim for a score of 730 or higher if you're aiming for top B schools in the US or Canada. When it comes to racing the GMAT, don't focus on accuracy or just on accuracy, focus on building ability. Build that personalized study plan. It will tell you how much time you need, where you need to spend that time, and what metrics you need to track. Uh, Remember those 4 stages of learning and the areas that you need to focus on at each of those stages. And then lastly, to get to that 90th percentile, focus on getting feedback, act upon that feedback. And again, to get that feedback, you do need assessment engine. You do need a assessment engine that allows you to focus your energy on your area of weakness. You do need those detailed solutions. And finally, write to me if you need any help. And again, thank you for spending time with us today, and it was great having you guys. Your participation was amazing, and again, I know it's hard work, but it's very rewarding. Go work towards your dream score, and do let us know when you succeed. And if you need help, do write to me. With that, I'm going to share this presentation. Let me give this over to you. And if you have any other question, I'd be happy to take that. Siddharth says if someone gets a starting question wrong, does it mean they'll score way less than someone who doesn't? No, Siddharth, that doesn't mean that. I mean, one of the things that you should take away from all of this is that GMAT's a test of ability. It measures ability. You can make a few mistakes, but as long as you have the ability, you'd be able to come back. On the other hand, if you don't have the ability, you're going to find that you can practice thousands and thousands of questions and you won't get anywhere. Okay, I'm just going to share some of that research. Okay, here's the article on what causes success on the GMAT. You guys can take a look at that. All right, guys, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining me today. And first of all, don't forget, we have the quant workshop tomorrow. Let me actually share share the registration link for you. There's the link to quant workshop, and then we have the SC webinar next week. Do register for the same. And the SC webinar, Pal is going to focus on that meaning-based approach, and she's going to help you figure out how to ace the GMAT. How to ace GMAT sentence correction, I'm sorry. Okay, you can click on these buttons to register for the same. And to download the presentation, just select on SS1 updated and click on download files, and you should be able to get there. Okay, with that, thank you guys.